Marcus Thompson's Tuesday morning began like any other in downtown Seattle, the familiar rhythm of urban life humming around him as he navigated the crowded sidewalks toward his favorite coffee shop. The October air carried the crisp promise of autumn, and he pulled his jacket tighter as he checked his phone for the third time, reviewing the day's meetings and deadlines that seemed so important just hours ago. The barista at Grind Coffee knew his order by heart: large dark roast, no sugar, extra shot, and Marcus exchanged pleasantries about the weekend's football game while waiting. The morning news played on the mounted television behind the counter, but he barely registered the anchor's words about isolated incidents of violence in the neighboring districts, too focused on reviewing code specifications for his afternoon presentation. The first sign something was wrong came when the regular programming suddenly cut to an emergency broadcast. The cheerful morning show host's face disappeared, replaced by a grim news anchor whose voice carried an unusual tension. "We're receiving reports of violent incidents throughout the metropolitan area," she announced, her professional composure cracking slightly. "Authorities are advising residents to remain indoors and avoid large gatherings until further notice." Marcus glanced around the coffee shop, noting how other customers had stopped their conversations to stare at the screen. The barista, a college student named Jenny whom Marcus had chatted with for months, paused mid-pour, her face pale with concern. Then the screaming started outside. Marcus turned toward the large front windows just as a disheveled man in a torn business suit stumbled into view. The man's gait was wrong, jerky and unnatural, like a marionette controlled by an inexperienced puppeteer. His clothes were stained with something dark that Marcus's mind initially refused to identify as blood. The man's eyes, visible even from inside the shop, were clouded white, like cataracts, and his jaw hung slack in a way that suggested something fundamental had broken inside his skull. When Jenny moved toward the window to get a better look, the man's head snapped toward the movement with predatory precision. What happened next would replay in Marcus's nightmares for months to come. The infected man, because that's what he was, Marcus realized with growing horror, launched himself at the window with inhuman force. The safety glass spider-webbed but held, and the thing on the other side began clawing at the barrier with fingernails that were already bloodied and torn. Other customers screamed and backed away, but Marcus found himself frozen, watching as more figures appeared in the street. They moved with the same unnatural gait, their heads turning in unison toward the sounds of panic emanating from the coffee shop. Jenny, in a moment of misguided compassion, approached the door. "Maybe he's hurt," she said, reaching for the handle. "Maybe we can help him." Marcus's survival instincts, dormant for 28 years of comfortable suburban life, suddenly roared to life. He lunged forward, grabbing Jenny's wrist just as she turned the lock. "No," he said, his voice carrying a conviction that surprised him. "Look at his eyes. Look at how he's moving. That's not someone who needs help." As if responding to his words, the infected man's companions began gathering around the window, their clouded eyes fixed on the people inside. Marcus counted 6, then 8, then stopped counting as more shambled into view. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Whatever was happening, it was spreading fast and it was spreading throughout the city. His phone buzzed with emergency alerts, each message more urgent than the last. Seek immediate shelter. Avoid contact with affected individuals. Do not attempt to provide aid to infected persons. The coffee shop's back exit led to an alley that Marcus knew well from his daily walks. He gathered Jenny and 3 other customers, speaking in low, urgent tones about the need to move quietly and quickly. The infected outside seemed to respond to sound and movement, their heads turning in unison toward any disturbance. Marcus led the small group through the back door, moving with careful steps across the alley toward the adjacent building where he knew there was a service entrance that led to the underground parking garage. The city around them was transforming into something unrecognizable. Car alarms wailed in the distance, mixing with screams and the sound of breaking glass. Smoke rose from several directions, and Marcus could hear the distant pop of what might have been gunfire. His apartment building was only 4 blocks away, but it felt like miles as they navigated the chaos erupting around them. When they finally reached his building, Marcus found Mrs. Chin, his elderly neighbor from the 3rd floor, huddled in the lobby with her small dog. Her usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, and her eyes held the same shock that Marcus felt coursing through his own system. "Marcus," she whispered in her accented English, "what's happening to our city?" As if in answer to her question, something heavy slammed against the building's front door, followed by the sound of fingernails scraping against glass. Marcus looked at the small group of survivors he'd somehow become responsible for and realized that everything he'd known about life, about safety, about the predictable nature of existence, had ended forever. The third day of the outbreak dawned gray and silent, a stark contrast to the chaos that had consumed Seattle just 72 hours earlier. Marcus Thompson sat in his apartment's living room, his laptop balanced on his knees as he typed observations into a document he'd titled, Survival Notes. The emergency broadcast had stopped during the night, leaving only static on most channels, and the eerie quiet outside felt more threatening than the screaming had. Mrs. Chin sat across from him, methodically sharpening kitchen knives with a whetstone she'd retrieved from her apartment, while Jenny huddled near the window, keeping watch through a gap in the curtains they'd fashioned into a makeshift observation post. "They're different during the day," Marcus murmured, not looking up from his screen. He'd been documenting patterns in the infected's behavior, treating it like a complex coding problem that required systematic analysis. "Less aggressive, more sluggish. I think they're responding to light levels or maybe temperature." Mrs. Chin nodded without pausing her work. Despite her 73 years, she'd adapted to their new reality with remarkable pragmatism, transforming from a retired librarian into their group's unofficial weapons specialist and tactical advisor. Through careful observation, they'd learned that the infected moved in loose groups, rarely as individuals. They seemed to communicate through low moans and clicking sounds, though Marcus wasn't sure if it was actual communication or just instinctive noise-making. Most importantly, they discovered that the creatures were drawn to sound and movement, but seemed to lose interest if their target remained completely still and silent for extended periods. This knowledge had already saved their lives twice when small groups had wandered through the building's lobby. Jenny shifted at the window, her body tensing. "Movement," she whispered, holding up 2 fingers, then 3. Marcus closed his laptop and crept to the window. 3 infected wandered through the courtyard below, their movements listless and unfocused. One wore the tattered remains of a nurse's uniform, another dragged what looked like a broken leg, and the third, Marcus's stomach clenched, couldn't have been more than 16 years old. They moved past the building's entrance without interest, confirming Marcus's theory that they were less active during daylight hours. "We need more people," Mrs. Chin said quietly, testing the edge of a carving knife against her thumb. "And we need to establish better defenses. This building has good bones, but we're vulnerable on the ground floor." Marcus nodded, thinking about the building's layout. The residential building had 24 units across 6 floors, with a secure lobby and a single stairwell. The roof access provided an emergency exit, and the basement offered storage and utility rooms. If they could secure the ground floor and establish communication with other survivors, they might have a chance. Their opportunity came that afternoon when they heard tapping on the pipes. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Morse code for SOS. Marcus grabbed a wrench and responded, tapping back the same pattern. The reply came from what sounded like the second floor. "Medical office. Trap. Help." Marcus looked at Mrs. Chin, who was already strapping a knife to her belt. "Sarah Martinez," she said matter-of-factly. "She runs the urgent care clinic on the 2nd floor. Good person. We help her." The rescue operation became their first real test of coordinated action. Marcus used his technical skills to create a noise distraction system using his portable speaker and smartphone, placing it in the lobby and programming it to play sounds that would draw any infected away from the stairwell. Mrs. Chen led the way up the stairs, moving with surprising stealth for someone her age, while Jenny remained at the window as their lookout. They found Sarah barricaded in her office, surrounded by medical supplies and looking remarkably composed for someone who'd been trapped for 3 days. "I'm a paramedic," Sarah explained as they helped her gather essential supplies. "I've been monitoring radio chatter on my emergency scanner. The situation is widespread: Seattle, Portland, Vancouver. But there are survivor groups forming, and some are getting organized." She paused, hefting a bag of medications. "I also know these things used to be people. They're not supernatural or magical. They're sick, and sickness follows rules. We just need to figure out what those rules are." Back in Marcus's apartment, now serving as their informal headquarters, Sarah shared what she'd learned from her medical training and radio intelligence. The infected retained basic motor functions but showed no signs of higher cognitive ability. They didn't use tools, couldn't open doors, and seemed to operate on pure instinct. Most importantly, they appeared to be driven by 2 primary urges: seeking out sound and movement, and what Sarah delicately termed aggressive feeding behavior. "The good news," Sarah continued, spreading a building blueprint across Marcus's coffee table, "is that they're predictable. They follow patterns, respond to stimuli consistently, and seem to have limited problem-solving abilities. The bad news is that they don't seem to tire, they don't sleep, and they don't give up easily once they've identified a target. She pointed to the building's layout. We need to think of this place as a fortress. Secure the ground floor, establish multiple escape routes, and create a communication system with other survivors. That evening, as they took inventory of their combined resources, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since the outbreak began: hope. They had medical expertise, practical skills, and most importantly, they had each other. Mrs. Chen's wisdom and calm demeanor balanced Sarah's medical knowledge and Jenny's keen observation skills. Marcus realized that his role wasn't just to survive, but to coordinate their efforts and help them work as a team. The night brought their first major success. Using Marcus's motion detection app and a series of improvised alarms made from cans and string, they created an early warning system for the building's main entrance. When a small group of infected wandered through the lobby around midnight, their system worked perfectly, alerting them to the danger without giving away their position. As Marcus watched his companions work together with quiet efficiency, he understood that they weren't just surviving, they were learning to thrive in their new world. By the end of the first week, word of their secure building had spread through the survivor network that was slowly forming across the city. Marcus stood on the rooftop, watching the sunrise paint the abandoned streets in shades of orange and gold, when he spotted them, 3 figures moving carefully through the shadows below, avoiding the main streets where infected tended to congregate. They moved with purpose and coordination, not the aimless wandering of the infected, and Marcus felt his pulse quicken with the possibility of adding to their small group. The first to arrive was Jake Morrison, a former army mechanic whose calloused hands and steady demeanor immediately impressed the group. Jake had been trapped in his auto repair shop for 6 days, surviving on vending machine snacks and rainwater he'd collected in oil pans. He brought with him not just mechanical expertise, but a duffel bag full of tools that would prove invaluable for fortifying their position. "I've been watching this building for 2 days, he told Marcus as they helped him settle into a vacant apartment on the 4th floor. "You've got good sight lines, multiple exits, and your security system is smart. You're thinking like survivors, not just hiding like victims." Dr. Lisa Martinez arrived the next morning, no relation to Sarah despite the shared surname, carrying a veterinary medical bag and leading a limping German shepherd named Rex. Lisa's expertise with animal biology provided unexpected insights into the infected's behavior patterns. "They're operating on pure predatory instinct," she explained during their evening briefing, scratching Rex behind the ears as he rested against her legs. "No higher reasoning, no planning, just hunt, feed, and follow the pack. But that also means they're predictable in ways that might surprise us." The Patel family brought a different kind of strength when they arrived 3 days later. Ravi and Priya Patel, along with their 16-year-old twin sons Arjun and Vikram, had been trapped in their corner store for over a week. They'd managed to gather significant food supplies and, more importantly, the twins had proven remarkably adept at moving silently through the infected-filled streets. "They're like ghosts," Ravi explained proudly, watching his sons demonstrate their ability to navigate the building's stairwells without making a sound. "Video games, you know? All that practice sneaking around virtual worlds turned out to be useful training." Marcus found himself naturally falling into a leadership role, though he tried to make decisions through group consensus rather than autocratic command. Each morning, he organized brief meetings where they discussed supply needs, security concerns, and long-term planning. Sarah had suggested establishing a rotation system for watch duties, ensuring that someone was always monitoring the approaches to their building. Jake had begun reinforcing the ground floor entrances, using materials salvaged from other apartments to create barriers that would slow any infected breach without completely sealing them in. The rooftop garden project became their first major collaborative effort. Mrs. Chen had discovered that the building's roof received excellent sunlight, and several apartments had been abandoned with potted plants and gardening supplies. Lisa's knowledge of plant biology combined with the Patel family's experience running a store that sold seeds and gardening equipment. Within days, they had established the beginnings of a sustainable food production system, with tomatoes, herbs, and fast-growing vegetables that could supplement their dwindling canned goods. Their first real test came during what Marcus would later record in his journal as the long night. A massive horde, perhaps drawn by the scent of cooking food or the sound of construction, had surrounded their building just as the sun was setting. Jake estimated over 200 infected pressed against the ground floor barriers, their moans creating a constant, nerve-wracking soundtrack that seemed to resonate through the building's structure. The group had practiced for this scenario, but the reality was far more terrifying than any drill. For 18 hours they maintained complete silence. No one spoke above a whisper, footsteps were carefully planned to avoid creaking floorboards, and even Rex seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, remaining perfectly still at Lisa's side. The twins proved invaluable during this crisis, using their silent movement skills to check different floors and ensure that no infected had found alternative entry points. Marcus coordinated their response using a system of hand signals they developed, modified from military communications that Jake had taught them. The communication breakthrough came when Arjun, tinkering with an old ham radio he'd found in the building's maintenance room, managed to establish contact with another survivor group. Hello, this is Arjun at the Meridian building," he whispered into the microphone during a brief quiet period. "Is anyone out there?" The response that crackled through the static changed everything. "Meridian building, this is Dr. Rebecca Foster at Seattle General Hospital. We read you loud and clear. Are you secure? We have medical supplies and 43 survivors." The realization that they were part of a larger network of survivors transformed their perspective from mere survival to the possibility of rebuilding. Marcus stood at the window as dawn broke and the infected horde gradually dispersed, their attention drawn away by distant sounds. He watched Jake and Lisa discussing plans for expanding their fortifications, while Sarah and Mrs. Chen worked together to inventory their medical supplies for potential trade with other groups. The Patel family was already planning supply runs to gather materials for expanding their communication network. "We're not just surviving anymore," Marcus said to Jenny as they watched the last of the infected shuffle away from their building. "We're building something new." Jenny nodded, her face showing the same cautious optimism that Marcus felt growing within himself. They had learned to adapt, to work together, and most importantly, to hope. The world outside was still dangerous and unpredictable, but within their small community, they had created something worth protecting and expanding. As Marcus began planning their next moves, he realized that the apocalypse had not just ended their old lives. It had given them the opportunity to build something better. Tom Richards arrived on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after the outbreak, and Marcus's first instinct was relief. The man appeared at their building's entrance carrying a police tactical vest, a loaded backpack, and an air of military precision that seemed to promise security in their uncertain world. Tom claimed to be a former security supervisor for a downtown office complex, with training in crowd control and emergency response. His confident demeanor and knowledge of weapons safety impressed several group members, particularly Jake, who appreciated having someone with formal tactical training to consult with. "You've done good work here," Tom said during his first group meeting, scanning the fortified lobby and nodding approvingly at their early warning systems. "But you're thinking too defensively. The infected are mindless, predictable. We could clear entire blocks if we organized properly, create buffer zones around this building." Marcus felt a nagging unease at Tom's aggressive tone, but couldn't argue with his expertise. The man had successfully navigated downtown Seattle alone for 3 weeks, arriving with detailed maps of infected movement patterns and locations of useful supplies. Tom's influence grew quickly. He organized weapons training sessions, teaching the group proper knife handling and makeshift weapon construction. He established what he called patrol protocols, systematic sweeps of the building's perimeter to ensure no infected had found ways inside. Most importantly, he brought news from the outside world, stories of other survivor groups that had thrived by taking proactive measures against the infected threat. "There's a group in Bellevue that cleared a whole shopping mall," Tom reported during one evening briefing. 47 people living safely because they took action instead of just hiding. The first signs of trouble came when Tom began questioning Marcus's leadership decisions. During a heated discussion about resource allocation, Tom suggested that their group was wasting potential by focusing on sustainable farming and radio communication instead of expanding their territory. "We're sitting on prime real estate here," he argued, spreading his hand-drawn maps across the table. "The pharmacy 3 blocks north has enough medical supplies to trade with a dozen other groups. The sporting goods store on 5th Avenue has equipment we need. But we're treating this like a camping trip instead of a strategic operation." Marcus tried to balance Tom's aggressive suggestions with the group's established consensus-based approach, but the division was becoming apparent. Mrs. Chin and Sarah supported careful, methodical expansion, while Jake and the Patel twins were increasingly drawn to Tom's promise of decisive action. Dr. Lisa remained neutral, focusing on her medical duties and Rex's training as their early warning system. Jenny, sensing the growing tension, spent more time on watch duty, avoiding the group meetings that were becoming increasingly contentious. The crisis erupted when Tom announced his plan to raid the downtown pharmacy during what he called a calculated risk assessment window. He had observed the infected movement patterns and identified a 2-hour period when the target area would be relatively clear. "We go in fast, grab what we need, and get out before any major groups can respond," he explained, outlining a route that would take a team of 6 people through 3 blocks of uncertain territory. Marcus objected strongly, pointing out that their current medical supplies were adequate and that the risk far outweighed the potential benefits. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," Tom said, his voice rising with frustration. "You're so focused on playing it safe that you're missing opportunities to actually improve our situation. While we sit here rationing aspirin, there are antibiotics and surgical supplies just sitting there, waiting for someone with the courage to claim them." The argument that followed split the group almost down the middle, with Jake and Arjun volunteering for Tom's mission despite Marcus's explicit prohibition. Tom made his move the next morning while Marcus was on the roof checking their rain collection system. He took Jake, Arjun, and 2 newer arrivals, a couple named David and Maria who had joined the group just days earlier. They left through the building's service entrance, moving with the military precision that Tom had drilled into them during training sessions. Marcus discovered their absence when Jenny came running to the roof, her face pale with worry. "They're gone," she reported breathlessly. "Tom left a note saying they'd be back before noon with enough supplies to last us months." The waiting was agony. Marcus stood at the window with binoculars, scanning the streets for any sign of the unauthorized mission while Sarah monitored their radio for emergency signals. Mrs. Chin sat silently sharpening knives, her disapproval of Tom's reckless action evident in every precise movement. Dr. Lisa kept Rex close, noting how the dog's agitation seemed to increase as the hours passed without the team's return. Vikram, left behind while his twin brother participated in the dangerous mission, paced the building's corridors like a caged animal. The first sign of disaster came as a distant rumbling sound, like thunder rolling across the city. Marcus focused his binoculars toward downtown and felt his blood turn cold. A massive horde of infected was moving toward their neighborhood, far larger than any group they had encountered before. The scattered infected that normally wandered the streets were converging into a river of bodies, all moving with unified purpose toward their building. Tom's team had not only failed to return on schedule, they had somehow triggered the exact scenario that Marcus had feared most. The horde's arrival coincided with the sound of gunfire from the direction of the pharmacy. Jake's military training had included firearms, but the group had agreed to avoid using guns except in the most desperate circumstances due to the noise they generated. The fact that someone was firing weapons suggested that Tom's carefully planned mission had gone catastrophically wrong. Within minutes, the building was surrounded by more infected than Marcus had ever seen in one place, their numbers seeming to grow as more stragglers were drawn by the sounds of conflict. Mrs. Chun was injured during the desperate evacuation to the upper floors when a piece of furniture they were using to barricade the stairwell shifted unexpectedly, catching her leg. Sarah immediately took charge of treating the wound while Marcus coordinated the group's retreat to the roof. Jake appeared in the lobby just as they were sealing the stairwell, bloodied and alone, reporting that Tom's plan had collapsed when they discovered the pharmacy was already occupied by another group of survivors who mistook them for raiders. The ensuing confusion had drawn infected from across the downtown area, creating the crisis that now threatened to destroy everything they had built. The evacuation from their compromised building began at dawn, 3 days after the massive horde had finally dispersed enough to allow safe movement. Marcus stood on the roof one last time, looking out over the city that had become their prison, while the group gathered their essential supplies below. The radio chatter from Dr. Rebecca Foster at Seattle General had become increasingly urgent over the past week, with reports of organized survivor communities forming in the mountainous regions east of the city. Haven Valley, she called it, a fortified settlement where nearly 200 survivors had established a sustainable community complete with agriculture, medical facilities and defensive capabilities. The decision to abandon their building hadn't been easy, especially with Mrs. Chen still recovering from her leg injury. But the structural damage from the infected assault, combined with the building's compromised security and dwindling supplies, made staying untenable. Jake had conducted a thorough assessment and concluded that their defenses were beyond repair without resources they simply didn't have. More importantly, the radio communications with other survivor groups painted a picture of a larger network that could offer safety, medical care, and the chance to rebuild something greater than their small isolated community. Marcus had spent 2 sleepless nights planning their route, using maps provided by Dr. Foster and intelligence gathered from other survivor groups along the way. The journey to Haven Valley would take them through 43 miles of uncertain territory, requiring careful coordination of vehicle movement, supply management, and communication with other groups who could provide waypoints and shelter. The plan called for a convoy system using 3 vehicles, Jake's reinforced pickup truck, a medical van that Dr. Lisa had identified in the building's parking garage, and a supply truck that the Patel family had secured from their store's delivery fleet. Vehicle modification became their first major challenge. Jake's mechanical expertise proved invaluable as they reinforced windows with wire mesh, installed noise-dampening materials to reduce engine sound, and created escape hatches in case any vehicle became surrounded. Sarah coordinated medical preparations, ensuring they had portable first aid capabilities and emergency medications for Mrs. Chen's ongoing treatment. The twins, Arjun and Vikram, used their technical skills to establish mobile communication systems, rigging portable radios that would allow the convoy to maintain contact even if they became separated. Their departure was delayed when they established contact with another evacuating group, 6 survivors from a collapsed apartment complex who requested permission to join their convoy. Marcus wrestled with the decision, knowing that larger groups moved more slowly and attracted more attention, but ultimately couldn't abandon fellow survivors who had no other options. The combined group of 17 people would test every aspect of their planning, but it also brought additional skills. A former park ranger named Elena who knew the mountain routes, and a family with teenage children who could help with watch duties and supply management. The first day's journey took them through Seattle's suburban sprawl, where abandoned houses and empty shopping centers created an eerie landscape of interrupted lives. They encountered scattered infected, usually in small groups that were easily avoided through careful route planning and noise discipline. The convoy system worked well initially, with each vehicle maintaining radio contact and following predetermined protocols for stops and emergencies. Marcus rode in the lead vehicle with Jake and Elena, using her knowledge of back roads to avoid the main highways where other survivor groups had reported heavy infected populations. Their first major obstacle came at the Cascade foothills, where a bridge spanning a deep ravine had been partially destroyed by what appeared to be a military demolition. The structure was still passable for pedestrians, but vehicles would have to find an alternate route that would add hours to their journey and take them through areas with unknown infected populations. Elena studied her topographical maps while Jake assessed the bridge's structural integrity. "We can get the people across on foot," Jake reported, testing the remaining support cables. "But we'll lose the vehicles and most of our supplies." The decision to abandon their vehicles was agonizing but necessary. The group spent precious daylight hours transferring essential supplies into backpacks and portable containers, prioritizing medical equipment, food, water purification tablets, and communication gear. Mrs. Chen's mobility limitations required improvising a stretcher system that could be carried by rotating teams. Dr. Lisa made the difficult decision to leave behind most of her veterinary supplies, keeping only basic medical necessities and ensuring that Rex was equipped with a properly fitted pack to carry his own food and water. Crossing the damaged bridge became a test of nerve and coordination that pushed every member of the group to their limits. The remaining structure swayed ominously under their weight, and the sight of the ravine far below was enough to freeze several people with vertigo. Marcus went first, testing each step and establishing anchor points for safety ropes that Jake had salvaged from their vehicle supplies. Elena brought up the rear, using her outdoor experience to ensure that no one panicked or made sudden movements that could destabilize the crossing. The sight that greeted them on the far side of the bridge would have been devastating just weeks earlier, but Marcus found himself feeling oddly optimistic as he surveyed their group. They had lost their vehicles, most of their accumulated supplies, and the comfortable security of their fortified building. But they had gained something more valuable: absolute proof that they could work together under pressure, adapt to unexpected challenges, and support each other through genuine crisis. Mrs. Chen was walking with assistance but maintaining her usual determined demeanor. The twins were already scouting the trail ahead with Elena's guidance. Sarah and Dr. Lisa were discussing medical protocols for wilderness travel while Jake organized their remaining equipment with military efficiency. As the group settled into their first night of wilderness camping, Marcus realized that their journey to Haven Valley had become more than just a desperate flight from danger. They were pilgrims now, carrying the knowledge and experience they had gained through trial and error, ready to contribute to something larger than themselves. The mountains ahead were filled with unknown dangers, but they were no longer the frightened office worker and elderly librarian and college student who had first barricaded themselves in an apartment building. They were survivors, tested by fire and united by shared purpose, walking toward a future they would help build with their own hands. The forest silence felt alien after weeks of urban survival, broken only by the crunch of leaves underfoot and the distant sound of flowing water that Elena identified as Cascade Creek. Marcus had never considered himself an outdoorsman, But desperation proved an effective teacher as he learned to read the subtle signs that indicated safe camping spots, fresh water sources, and potential dangers. The group's second day in the wilderness had begun with a harsh lesson when Vikram nearly stepped into a concealed animal trap, reminding everyone that the forest held threats beyond the infected that continued to pursue them through the dense undergrowth. Elena's park ranger expertise became invaluable as she taught the group essential wilderness survival skills that their urban backgrounds had never required. She showed them how to identify edible plants, construct basic shelters using fallen branches and salvaged materials, and most importantly, how to move through the forest without leaving obvious trails that could be followed by either infected or hostile survivors. The forest will provide what you need, she explained while demonstrating water purification techniques using charcoal and cloth filters, but you have to learn its language first. The infected they encountered in the wilderness were different from their urban counterparts, adapted to the forest environment in ways that made them more dangerous despite their smaller numbers. These woodland infected moved with surprising stealth, their movements muffled by the soft forest floor, and their deteriorated clothing had taken on the mottled colors of bark and shadow that provided natural camouflage. Dr. Lisa observed that they seemed to have developed enhanced hearing to compensate for the limited sight lines in the dense forest, making noise discipline even more critical than it had been in the city. Marcus discovered unexpected talents during their forest trek, particularly an intuitive understanding of tracking and trap construction that surprised everyone, including himself. His software engineering background, with its emphasis on pattern recognition and logical problem-solving, translated remarkably well to reading animal tracks, identifying safe river crossings, and predicting weather changes based on cloud formations and wind patterns. "It's all about systems and variables," he explained to Jenny while showing her how to construct a simple snare trap. "The forest operates on principles just like code, and once you understand the logic you can work with it instead of against it." The group's first major test came when they discovered that their intended route to Haven Valley was blocked by a raging forest fire that had been burning for days, filling the air with smoke and forcing wildlife to flee in unpredictable directions. Elena studied her topographical maps and radio reports, calculating alternative routes that would add at least 2 days to their journey while taking them through areas she wasn't familiar with. The fire also created a new danger. Displaced infected were moving erratically through the forest, driven by the same primitive instincts that guided fleeing animals, but without the intelligence to avoid obvious hazards. Sarah's medical skills proved essential when Mrs. Chin developed a fever during their third night, likely from an infection related to her leg injury that hadn't healed properly during their stressful evacuation and journey. Without access to antibiotics or proper medical facilities, Sarah had to rely on Elena's knowledge of medicinal plants and improvise treatments using materials they could gather from the forest. The group spent an entire day creating a comfortable shelter and allowing Mrs. Chen to rest while Sarah experimented with herbal remedies that Elena remembered from her wilderness training. The twins, Arjun and Vikram, adapted to forest life with remarkable speed, their video game experience translating into real-world skills that proved surprisingly applicable. Their ability to think strategically about resource management, route planning, and risk assessment made them natural scouts who could move ahead of the group to identify potential dangers or opportunities. They established the first night watch rotations, created an efficient system for distributing food and water, and even improvised a communication system using reflected sunlight and small mirrors salvaged from their abandoned vehicles. Dr. Lisa's veterinary background provided unexpected advantages when the group encountered Rex's reaction to an unfamiliar forest environment. The German Shepherd had been their early warning system in the urban setting, but the overwhelming scents and sounds of the wilderness initially overwhelmed his senses, making him less effective at detecting infected presence. Lisa worked with Rex to retrain his responses, helping him distinguish between natural forest sounds and the subtle audio cues that indicated infected movement through underbrush. The group's most coordinated effort came when they were forced to outrun a forest fire that changed direction unexpectedly due to shifting winds. Elena's wilderness experience, combined with Marcus's logical planning and Jake's military discipline, created an evacuation system that moved 17 people through dense forest terrain in complete darkness while avoiding both the advancing flames and the infected that were also fleeing the fire. The experience required every member of the group to contribute their specialized skills while trusting completely in their companions' abilities. During quiet moments around their carefully concealed campfires, Marcus reflected on how profoundly each member of their group had changed since leaving the relative safety of their urban fortress. Mrs. Chin had evolved from a gentle librarian into a strategic thinker whose calm wisdom guided group decisions. Jenny had developed from a nervous coffee shop worker into a reliable scout with keen observational skills. The Patel family had transformed from store owners into a coordinated team that could manage complex logistics under pressure. Even in her weakened condition, Mrs. Chen continued to contribute by sharing stories and maintaining group morale during the most challenging moments. As they settled into their 5th night in the wilderness, still 2 days from Haven Valley, Marcus realized that their forest journey had accomplished something beyond mere survival. They had learned to work as a true community, sharing resources, skills, and responsibilities without the hierarchical structures that had caused problems with Tom's aggressive leadership style. The wilderness had stripped away the artificial divisions of their previous lives, creating bonds based on mutual dependence and shared hardship that would serve them well in whatever challenges lay ahead in their uncertain future. Haven Valley appeared through the morning mist like something from a dream, its high wooden walls and guard towers rising from the forest clearing with an air of permanence that seemed impossible in their chaotic world. Marcus felt a surge of relief as he surveyed the fortified compound through Elena's binoculars, counting at least 40 buildings within the perimeter and noting the organized movement of people going about their daily routines. After 7 days of wilderness survival, the sight of a functioning community with electric lights, cultivated gardens, and what appeared to be running water felt like a miraculous return to civilization. The reception at Haven Valley's main gate was efficient but cold, with armed guards conducting thorough searches of their belongings while a stern-faced woman in military fatigues recorded their names, skills, and medical conditions in a leather-bound logbook. "I'm Captain Morrison," she announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to unquestioned obedience. "Colonel Morrison leads this community and his rules keep us all alive. You'll be assigned quarters, work details, and orientation schedules. Follow orders, contribute to the community, and you'll find Haven Valley offers everything you need to survive and thrive." Marcus's first warning sign came during the mandatory orientation session, where Colonel Morrison himself addressed the new arrivals with a speech that emphasized discipline, hierarchy, and absolute loyalty to the community's leadership structure. The colonel was an imposing man in his 50s, with gray hair and piercing eyes that seemed to evaluate each person as either an asset or a liability. "Individual desires must be subordinated to collective security," he explained, pacing before the assembled newcomers like a drill sergeant addressing recruits. "We've survived because we've eliminated the chaos and indecision that destroyed the outside world. Here, orders are followed without question, and everyone serves according to their abilities." The work assignments revealed the true nature of Haven Valley's social structure, with newcomers assigned to the most dangerous and physically demanding tasks while established residents enjoyed safer positions within the compound's inner areas. Marcus found himself assigned to perimeter maintenance, which involved repairing fence sections and clearing infected corpses from the outer defensive barriers. Jake was sent to a construction crew building new fortifications, while Sarah and Dr. Lisa were assigned to medical duties under the strict supervision of the compound's established medical staff who made it clear that their outside experience was considered inferior to Haven Valley's proven methods. Mrs. Chen's age and injury should have qualified her for light duty, but instead she was assigned to what the supervisors called external reconnaissance, a euphemistic term for dangerous missions outside the compound's walls. Marcus realized with growing alarm that these assignments weren't random job placements. They were deliberate tests designed to identify which newcomers would accept exploitation without complaint and which might cause trouble for the established order. The Patel family had been separated, with the parents assigned to food service while the twins were placed in different work crews, clearly intended to prevent them from coordinating any resistance to the community's harsh policies. The living conditions reinforced the compound's hierarchical structure, with newcomers housed in crowded barracks while established residents enjoyed private quarters with amenities that seemed luxurious by post-apocalyptic standards. Marcus shared a dormitory-style room with 12 other recent arrivals, sleeping on thin mattresses arranged on metal bunks that reminded him uncomfortably of prison facilities. The food rationing system provided barely adequate nutrition for newcomers while the inner circle enjoyed fresh vegetables, meat, and even alcohol during their evening gatherings that newcomers were not permitted to attend. Elena's park ranger instincts proved valuable as she quietly gathered intelligence about Haven Valley's true operations, discovering that the community sustained itself through systematic exploitation of survivor groups who arrived seeking shelter. "They use newcomers as expendable labor for the most dangerous work," she whispered to Marcus during one of their brief private conversations. "The external reconnaissance missions are suicide runs designed to clear infected zones so the established residents can expand their territory without risk. Most of the people who go on those missions never come back. The revelation of Haven Valley's true nature came when Marcus witnessed a disciplinary session, where 3 residents who had questioned work assignments were subjected to public humiliation and reduced rations as punishment for undermining community morale. Colonel Morrison presided over the proceedings with the cold efficiency of a military tribunal, explaining to the assembled community that individual dissent threatened everyone's survival and would not be tolerated. The message was clear: absolute submission was the price of safety, and anyone who challenged the system would face consequences that extended far beyond mere punishment. Marcus began planning their escape when he learned that Mrs. Chen had been selected for a particularly dangerous mission that everyone understood was effectively a death sentence. The mission involved clearing infected from an abandoned shopping complex that Colonel Morrison wanted to convert into additional storage space, a task that would require a small team to enter a confined space filled with unknown numbers of infected. The selection of Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman with a healing leg injury, made it obvious that her assignment was intended as an example to other newcomers who might consider challenging the compound's authority structure. The escape plan required careful coordination with other disillusioned newcomers who had recognized Haven Valley's true nature, including several members of other survivor groups who had arrived over the past weeks only to find themselves trapped in a system that offered safety in exchange for complete autonomy. Marcus realized that their group's wilderness survival experience, combined with their established teamwork and communication skills, gave them advantages that many other newcomers lacked. They had learned to function as an independent community, and they possessed the knowledge and confidence needed to survive outside the compound's walls. As Marcus lay awake in his bunk during their final night at Haven Valley, listening to the quiet conversations of other trapped survivors, he understood that their journey was far from over. They had traveled hundreds of miles and survived countless dangers only to discover that the greatest threat to their freedom and dignity came not from infected hordes or natural disasters, but from other humans who had allowed fear and desperation to transform them into oppressors. Tomorrow would bring their most dangerous challenge yet: escaping from a fortified compound filled with people who viewed them as expendable resources rather than fellow survivors deserving of respect and autonomy. The escape from Haven Valley began at dawn during the shift change when guards were most distracted, with Marcus leading 17 disillusioned survivors through a carefully planned route that Elena had scouted during her reconnaissance missions. The group moved in coordinated teams through the compound's maintenance areas, using Jake's knowledge of the facility's layout and the twins' silent movement skills to avoid detection while gathering other trapped newcomers who had agreed to join their desperate bid for freedom. Mrs. Chen, despite her age and injury, proved instrumental in convincing hesitant survivors to take the risk, her quiet dignity and moral authority providing the courage needed to abandon the false security of their oppressive sanctuary. The revolt that followed their escape was swift and decisive, as other survivor groups within Haven Valley recognized the opportunity to break free from Colonel Morrison's authoritarian control. Marcus watched from the forest edge as smoke rose from the compound, knowing that their departure had triggered a larger uprising among residents who had been waiting for someone to demonstrate that escape was possible. Elena's radio crackled with transmissions from various survivor groups coordinating their exodus, creating a chaotic situation that would make pursuit difficult for Morrison's remaining loyalists who chose to maintain the oppressive system rather than embrace the uncertainty of freedom. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood on the balcony of what had once been the Alpine Ridge Resort, surveying the bustling community that had emerged from the collective wisdom and shared experience of over 40 survivors who had rejected Haven Valley's authoritarian model. The abandoned mountain resort provided an ideal foundation for their new settlement, with existing infrastructure that could be modified for defense while maintaining the open, collaborative atmosphere that made their community fundamentally different from Morrison's hierarchical compound. The resort's multiple buildings allowed for privacy and personal space while encouraging the social interactions that built trust and cooperation among community members. The transformation of Marcus from a confused office worker into a confident leader had been gradual but profound, shaped by months of crisis management, difficult decisions, and the constant responsibility of considering the welfare of others before his own immediate needs. His leadership style emphasized consensus building and empowerment of others rather than the command and control approach that had made Haven Valley such an oppressive environment. Every major decision was discussed openly in community meetings where dissent was encouraged and minority opinions were respected, creating a decision-making process that was sometimes slower but ultimately more sustainable and just. The community's survival systems reflected the diverse skills and knowledge that each member contributed, creating redundancy and resilience that no single leader could have achieved through autocratic planning. Sarah and Dr. Lisa established a medical center that provided both human and veterinary care while training community members in basic first aid and emergency response. Jake's mechanical expertise, combined with the Patel family's business experience, created workshops where essential tools and equipment could be manufactured and repaired using salvaged materials and improvised techniques that reduced their dependence on outside resources. Elena's wilderness knowledge proved invaluable as the community developed sustainable food production systems that went far beyond the simple rooftop garden they had maintained in their urban safe house. The resort's grounds provided space for extensive agriculture, while the surrounding forest offered opportunities for hunting, foraging, and gathering materials needed for construction and crafting. Mrs. Chen's organizational skills and institutional memory helped establish educational programs where knowledge and skills were shared systematically, ensuring that essential survival techniques would not be lost if individual community members were injured or killed. The community's defensive capabilities evolved through collaborative innovation rather than military-style hierarchy, with early warning systems that combined Rex's trained senses with electronic surveillance equipment salvaged from the resort and nearby facilities. The twins, Arjun and Vikram, had become expert scouts whose ability to move silently through infected territory allowed them to maintain contact with other survivor communities and gather intelligence about potential threats. Their communication network had expanded to include over a dozen other settlements, creating a mutual aid system that provided security through cooperation rather than isolation and mistrust. Trade relationships with other survivor communities brought not just material benefits but also new ideas, technologies, and cultural exchanges that enriched their community life beyond mere survival. Marcus negotiated agreements with agricultural communities in the valleys below, exchanging manufactured goods and technical expertise for food products and raw materials that their mountain location couldn't provide. A community of former university researchers had established a library and workshop facility where scientific knowledge was being preserved and applied to post-apocalyptic challenges, creating innovations in water purification, renewable energy, and medical treatment that benefited the entire regional survivor network. The arrival of new survivors had become a regular occurrence, with individuals and small groups seeking refuge from failed communities, infected overruns, or simply the isolation of surviving alone in an increasingly hostile world. Marcus had developed screening and integration processes that balanced security concerns with humanitarian obligations, ensuring that newcomers could contribute their skills while learning the collaborative principles that made their community sustainable. Each new arrival brought fresh perspectives and capabilities that strengthened the community's overall resilience while challenging existing assumptions and encouraging continued growth and adaptation. As Marcus walked through the community's bustling central area on a crisp autumn morning, watching children play safely while adults worked on projects ranging from advanced solar panel installation to traditional woodworking, he reflected on the profound transformation that the apocalypse had brought to his understanding of human potential and community organization. The world beyond their mountain sanctuary remained dangerous and unpredictable, filled with infected hordes and human predators like Colonel Morrison, but within their small corner of the wilderness, they had created something that felt more genuinely civilized than the society that had existed before the outbreak. Here, every person mattered, every voice was heard, and every day brought new opportunities to build something better than what had been lost. The apocalypse had taken everything familiar from their lives, but in return, it had given them the chance to discover who they really were when everything else was stripped away, and to build a future based on their highest aspirations rather than their deepest fears.